I love camping. I've done it for years, always looking for the most secluded spots where I could be alone with nature. But after this night, I don't think I'll ever go camping alone again. Last summer, I took a solo trip to a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains. I found a small clearing by a stream, miles away from any official campsite. It was perfect, silent, untouched. Just me and the wilderness. By the time the sun set, I had my tent set up, a fire going, and dinner cooked. The night was calm, aside from the occasional rustling in the bushes. Probably just small animals, I told myself. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and shut my eyes. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up to a sound. Breathing. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was slow, deliberate, and close, just outside my tent. My heart started pounding. I held my breath, listening. The breathing didn't move. It stayed in one spot, like whoever, or whatever, was standing right outside my tent, listening to me. I reached for my knife, gripping it tightly. My brain raced through possibilities. A bear? No, they sniff and grunt. A person? But I was miles from the nearest trail. Then, I heard something that made my stomach drop. The zipper of my tent started to move. Just a little, a few inches. I lunged forward, grabbing it from the inside and yanking it shut. "Who's there?" I shouted. Silence, no footsteps, no rustling, just silence. After what felt like hours, I finally built up the courage to grab my flashlight and unzip the tent. I swung the light in every direction. No one was there, but something was. Right outside my tent, in the dirt, were two deep footprints, barefoot, large. Whoever it was had been standing there, breathing, for who knows how long. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my stuff and got the hell out of there. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted, but I do know this: I wasn't alone, and next time, I won't be camping alone either. A few years ago, my friend Kyle and I went on a camping trip deep in the Oregon wilderness. We wanted total isolation, just nature, a campfire, and the open sky. We hiked for hours until we found the perfect clearing, surrounded by thick trees. It felt untouched, peaceful. That peace didn't last long. After setting up camp, we started a fire and talked late into the night. Around 1 a.m., Kyle went into the tent while I stayed outside to stoke the fire. That's when I heard it, a branch snapping. I turned my head toward the trees, scanning with my flashlight. Nothing. Probably a deer, I thought. But as I lowered the light, something caught my eye. Something high up. There was a figure sitting in a tree, watching me. At first, I thought it was an animal, but as my light hit it, I saw human legs, a torso, arms, a man. He was perched on a thick branch about 20 feet up, completely still. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could tell he was staring right at me. I felt frozen. My brain refused to process what I was looking at. Then, as if he knew I saw him, he tilted his head slightly. That was enough. I bolted into the tent, shaking Kyle awake. "There's someone in the trees," I whispered. He groggily sat up, clearly thinking I was messing with him. But then, we heard something land outside. A dull thud, like someone dropping from a height. Kyle's eyes went wide. We held our breath, listening. Footsteps circled the tent, slow, deliberate. Then, nothing. Minutes passed, then an hour. We sat there, gripping our knives, too scared to move. Eventually, the exhaustion was too much, and we drifted in and out of sleep. When the sun rose, we unzipped the tent, stepping outside cautiously. No one was there, but near the dying fire, in the dirt, were deep handprints. Whoever it was had been crawling around our tent while we slept. We packed up and left immediately, hiking faster than we ever had before. To this day, Kyle refuses to talk about that night. I don't know what we saw or what would have happened if we had stayed another night. I just know that something or someone was waiting. It's funny how your best friends can agree to almost anything, as long as it is together. That's probably why I love my friends more than my family. A while back, my friends and I took a camping trip to a remote wooded area. It was a solid group, 5 of us, all experienced campers. We set up a big tent, made a fire, and joked around late into the night. At around 2 a.m., I woke up feeling uneasy. The fire had died down, and everything outside was eerily silent. It wasn't just the normal quiet of the woods. It felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. That's when I felt something brush against my foot. I sat up, my heart pounding. The others were asleep, but my foot was near the edge of the tent, and I knew I hadn't imagined it. Then it happened again, but this time, it wasn't just a brush. Something gripped my ankle. It was cold, wet, like a hand. I jerked my leg back and kicked instinctively, scrambling backward. "Wake up!" I hissed. Jason, the lightest sleeper, groggily sat up just as the fabric of the tent started moving. We grabbed our flashlights and pointed them at the tent wall. Hands, dozens of them, pressing against the fabric, sliding up and down like they were searching for an opening. They were pushing inward, testing the material. "Holy shit!" Jason whispered. The others were waking up now, confusion turning into horror. Panic hit us all at once. Jason grabbed his knife and slashed at the tent. The second he made a cut, a piercing, inhuman wail rang through the night. The hands vanished. We bolted outside, shining our lights in every direction. Nothing. No footprints, no people. Just dense trees and silence. Then I noticed something off. The tent still moved. We backed up, shining our lights on the structure. The tent fabric pulsed like something was still pressing against it, from inside. Jason stepped forward hesitantly and flipped the tent flap open. It was empty. As the first light of dawn touched the trees, we packed up. But as we rolled the tent, Jason hesitated, then flipped it inside out. I felt my stomach drop. The inside of the tent was covered in faint, blackened handprints. The worst part, some of the handprints were tiny, like a child's. We never camped there again. If there is one thing most people can say about me with any certainty, it's that I enjoy my alone time. Long drives, camping, cycling, and exploring trails. I enjoy doing it all by myself. Last summer, I was solo camping near a river in Colorado, a place I had camped before without issue. It was peaceful, just the sound of running water and the occasional hoot of an owl. Sometime around 1 a.m., I heard splashing. It sounded like something big moving in the river. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the water. At first, I didn't see anything, just the rippling surface. But then, something rose from the water. A head, not an animal, a person. But their face was wrong, pale, sunken, eyes too large for their face. Their mouth hung open unnaturally wide, as if frozen in a silent scream. Then it started walking toward me, not swimming, walking. The water only reached its waist, but it moved fast, its long arms swaying unnaturally. I stumbled backward, tripping over my gear. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body felt frozen. The figure stepped onto the shore, water dripping from its sagging skin. It spoke. "Can you help me?" The voice sounded warped, like it was coming from underwater. A deep, instinctual terror clawed at me. This wasn't a lost hiker. This wasn't human. I fumbled for the bear spray and aimed. The second I pressed the trigger, it shrieked. The sound was deafening, not human at all. The thing lurched backward, as if the mist was burning it. Then it bolted back into the river, disappearing under the water. I didn't pack my tent. I just grabbed my keys and ran to my car. As I peeled out of the campsite, I looked in my rearview mirror. The figure was standing on the riverbank, watching me leave. And then, it smiled. But as I turned onto the main road, something caught my eye. The water wasn't still, it was churning. Something else was moving beneath the surface. Something bigger. I kept driving, refusing to look back again. But that night, even hours away from the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling. I swore as I lay awake in my motel bed that I could still hear the river splashing. There's something peaceful about being completely isolated, surrounded by nothing but nature. That's why I like to camp alone. Always have. No distractions, no people, just me and the wilderness. Last fall, I took a trip to a remote part of Montana, No trails, no nearby campsites, just miles of dense forest and a small clearing where I set up my tent. It was perfect. The first night was uneventful, except for one strange thing. I woke up to find my flashlight missing. I was sure I had set it beside me before falling asleep, but when I woke up, it was nowhere to be found. I figured I must have knocked it over in my sleep, but after checking my entire tent and even stepping outside to search, it was just gone. The next night, my knife disappeared. Again, I had placed it beside me before bed, and again, when I woke up, it was missing. This time I searched harder, tearing through my backpack, shaking out my sleeping bag. Nothing. That's when I noticed something odd. On the outside of my tent, faintly visible against the fabric, were marks. At first, they just looked like dirt smudges, but when I shined my remaining flashlight at them, I realized they were shapes, patterns, circles, spirals, strange twisting lines that seemed too deliberate to be random. I told myself it had to be some natural phenomenon, maybe dew mixed with dirt. Maybe my breath had created condensation patterns, but deep down, I didn't believe that. On the third night, it got worse. I was determined to stay awake and catch whatever was happening. I kept my flashlight clutched in my hand, my backpack zipped tight, but at some point, exhaustion got the best of me. I woke up in complete darkness, not because it was night, because my tent was gone. Not collapsed, not torn, just gone. I was lying on my sleeping bag, completely exposed under the open sky. My gear was still there, but my tent, the entire tent, had vanished. And then I saw them, the patterns, not on the tent anymore. They were on the ground, carved deep into the dirt around me, forming a massive spiral that stretched out into the woods. I didn't pack. I didn't even look for my missing things. I just grabbed my keys, ran to my car, and drove until the sun came up. When I finally stopped hours later, in a completely different town, I checked my backpack. Inside, neatly placed on top of my clothes, was my missing knife. I don't camp alone anymore. My name is Brian. I've been camping all my life, but last summer was the first time I ever felt like I was losing my mind. I went to a familiar spot, a secluded area in Oregon I'd visited multiple times. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and cooked dinner as the sun set. It was peaceful until I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, something was wrong. My firewood was stacked neatly again. My tent looked untouched, as if I had never used it the night before, and my watch was reset to 6 p.m., the exact time I had arrived. I tried to brush it off as exhaustion or a weird mistake, but as I went through the day, everything happened exactly the same way it had yesterday. I walked to the river. I gathered firewood. I even found the exact same dead branch I had tripped over the day before. By sunset, I was unsettled, but I told myself I was just overthinking. Maybe I was just too familiar with this place. But then I went to sleep, and when I woke up, it was 6 p.m. again. Everything was reset. The firewood was untouched. My tracks were gone. My watch showed the same time. I was in a loop. I tried everything to break it. I packed my stuff and hiked away, only to find myself walking back into my own campsite. I carved my name into a tree, but when I woke up, the carving was gone. No matter what I did, I always woke up at 6 p.m., back where I started. On what I guessed was the fifth cycle, I tried something drastic. I set fire to my tent. I watched it burn to the ground, convinced that this would finally break whatever was happening. I forced myself to stay awake all night, sitting in the ashes of my camp. At some point, I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, my tent was standing again, perfectly set up, completely untouched, and my watch, 6 p.m. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just sat there staring at my untouched campsite, wondering if I would ever leave. Because what if I was already dead? What if I had been camping here forever? What I'm about to tell you might not sound real to you, but when you experience it firsthand, it's impossible to forget. I've camped in a lot of places, mountains, forests, even deserts, but I've never experienced anything like what happened last fall. I had set up camp in a dense patch of woods far from any trails. The first night was peaceful, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. But on the second night, I noticed something off about my tent. It looked different. The fabric seemed looser, sagging slightly in a way it hadn't before. I ran my hand along the surface, thinking maybe the stakes had come loose, but it was secure. I brushed it off and went to bed. That night, I woke up to a sound, a soft, rhythmic noise. Inhale, exhale, like breathing. I held my breath, listening closely. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the tent itself. I sat up slowly, my skin crawling. The fabric of my tent was subtly expanding and contracting, like a chest rising and falling. I touched the wall, and the second my fingers made contact, the breathing stopped. I sat frozen in silence, my hands still pressed against the fabric. And then, it moved, not from the outside, from inside the material. I yanked my hand away, my mind racing. My tent wasn't just moving, it was alive. I scrambled for my flashlight and unzipped the door in one frantic motion, practically throwing myself out. I turned and shined the light on my tent. It looked normal, like a regular, inanimate tent. I waited, heart pounding, expecting something to happen, but nothing did. After several minutes, I convinced myself it had to be exhaustion, maybe sleep paralysis. I wasn't thinking straight. I climbed back in, forcing myself to sleep. The next morning I woke up and immediately noticed something was different. The tent felt smaller, like it had shrunk around me overnight. The walls were tighter, pressing closer to my body. I unzipped the door, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled harder. Nothing. It wasn't stuck. There was no zipper anymore. The door had sealed shut. I punched the fabric. I screamed. The walls flexed around me, tightening. Then I felt it. A heartbeat. Not mine. The tent shuddered and began to close in on me. I don't remember how I got out. I just remember waking up in the dirt, gasping for air, my body covered in scratches. The tent was gone. Not collapsed, not torn. Gone. I don't know what I slept in that night, and I don't ever want to find out. Subscribe for more dark tales.